Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome Hampton Sides, the wide, wide sea imperial ambition, first contact, and the faithful final voyage of Captain James Cook. Hampton Sides' bravura account of Cook's last journey both wrestles with Cook's legacy and provides a thrilling narrative of the titanic efforts and the continual danger that characterized exploration in the 1700s. Cook was renowned for his peerless seamanship and his humane leadership, and his dedication to science. The famed naturalist Joseph Banks accompanied him on his first voyage, and Cook has been called one of the most important figures of the Age of Enlightenment. He was also deeply interested in the native people he encountered. In fact, he stated mission was return a Tahitian man, Mai, who became the toast of London, to his home islands. On previous expeditions, Cook mapped huge swaths of the Pacific, including the east coast of Australia, and initiated the first European contact with numerous peoples. He treated his crew well and endeavored to learn about the societies he encountered with curiosity and without judgment. At once, a fiercely paced story of adventure of the high seas and a searching examination of the complexities and consequences of the age of exploration. The Wide, Wide Sea is a major work from one of our finest narrative nonfiction writers. Hampton Sides is the author of the New York Times bestselling histories On the Desperate Ground, In the Kingdom of Ice, Hellhound on His Trail, Blood and Thunder, The Ghost Soldier, which won the PEN USA Award for Nonfiction. He lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Hampton Sides.
Thank you. Great to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces. Can you hear me? Better? I see a lot of familiar faces. Please keep your heckling down to a minimum. No rotten tomatoes, if possible. So great to be back here in Washington, D.C., where my wife and I met and where we lived for about a decade. And it's just great to be back at this really the very best bookstore in America, certainly on the East Coast anyway. Politics and Prose. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's great to be able to talk about this new book with a very sophisticated, East Coast audience now. I've been all over the country talking about it. This is one city, I think possibly the only place where Captain Cook didn't go. He would have liked it, though. A lot of complicated coastlines to chart. He loved rivers. So Captain Cook, the subject of this book, how many of you know a whole lot about him? Because there's always some cookies in the audience. They're called cookies, by the way. And there's a whole subculture of people who do nothing but study his work and the work of sort of his contemporaries. So I have to ask. Let's move into the slideshow. We can bring those lights down just a little bit. So this is the guy. This is the dude, Captain James Cook, who, and this is a portrait, I think the very best portrait that's ever been done of Captain Cook. It was painted in 1776 and was promptly lost to history and was found 2 centuries later at an estate in Ireland. So you get his intensity, you get his melancholy, you get the sense of this is a man who is above all else, and he has many different skills. He is essentially a cartographer. He's a maker of maps, brilliant maps with very crude tools to work with back in those days. And you see the intensity of the guy. I don't think you'd necessarily want to go downstairs and have a glass of wine with him in the coffee shop there. He wasn't a fun guy to hang out with, but he was a very rigid, very stern, Quaker-trained dude from Yorkshire. And this is the subject of the book. It's not a biography by any means. It's a story of his third and final adventure, but he is, of course, kind of the main through line for the book. So Captain Cook. Very well known in Australia, very well known in New Zealand, very well known in England, and parts of Canada as well. Not as well known in America. And I just really quickly talk about how he's kind of confused often with many other captains, real and imaginary, like Captain Kidd here, not a very good-looking guy, a buccaneer, Captain Kidd. There's, of course, Captain Kirk. Captain Kirk, Captain James Kirk was believed widely to have been based upon Captain James Cook, a man who went farther than any man before him. Anyway, there are some similarities. Captain Hook, of course. I cannot tell you, truthfully, how many people thought I was working on this book about a pirate with a hook, with the hook and, the pirate with a parrot on his shoulder and all that sort of thing. Not that guy. And not, I have to say this, the greatest captain of all time, I think we can all agree on this, Captain Crunch. We're dealing with Captain Cook, and this is the official portrait that was sort of approved by the Admiralty, and is, you can see it at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, with all the accoutrements of discovery, and this was a world traveler, a guy who had 3 voyages around the world, monumental undertakings that involved hundreds of men in multiple ships, multiple islands, and even parts of continents that were where he made first contact with people. Huge numbers of just a huge amount of information that emerged from his voyages. Great artwork, great scientific sort of pieces of information, anthropological information. I think you can argue, and I think quite convincingly, that he was the greatest explorer there ever was. You could certainly make that argument. He's in the pantheon with Magellan and Alexander von Humboldt and Marco Polo and a handful of others. However, he's very controversial today. His legacy is very controversial. And that's partly because of all the places he went. So people ask, where did Captain Cook go? He went everywhere. He, the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Antarctic, the Arctic. He went from the realm of polar bears to the realm of penguins, and all points in between. The blue line shows the voyage that my book concerns, which is his final voyage, his 3rd voyage. But because he went to all these places, and because he was such an incredible map maker, he placed all these very remote islands on the atlases of the world, and then widely published them with the exact coordinates. And he thus, in his own way, accelerated the process of imperialism and colonialism. And I think this is one of the chief reasons why he is so widely hated throughout Polynesia today. Not so much what he did, but what came immediately after him as a result of his voyages. So you get this kind of thing. He's been hacked from his plinth in Melbourne and Victoria, lots of other places. His monuments have been vandalized and splattered with red paint, including this place here in Hawaii where he was killed. This is a picture I took when I was there. So you get the idea. He's viewed very widely as a symbol of colonialism and sort of the worst processes that were set in motion by these voyages of discovery. So with that in mind, we got a very complicated but also a very, very accomplished explorer to talk about as we go through our journey. So what I'm going to talk about today isn't just sort of Cook and his voyage, but my own voyage in pursuit of him. Went to a lot of really great places. Don't hate me for the fact that I had to go to so many great places that Captain Cook went. And my wife, Anne, where's Anne? She's in there in the middle there. She said to me early on, she's my editor, she's my first reader, she's amazing. I couldn't have written this book without her. But she also said, why don't you pick a book? You've gone to Korea, you've been to the Philippines, you've been to Siberia, you've been into the Arctic. Why don't you pick a book that involves travel to some really nice places that I'd like to go to with you? And I said, well, sure, I'll get back to you. And then I said, well, how about Captain Cook? And, it was like, where'd he go? And I said, like, these places, Tonga, New Zealand, Tahiti, Hawaii. And she liked that idea. So why do we care about Captain Cook? What do you need to know about him? I think going into the third voyage, there are a number of things that you kind of need to understand about why he was such a big deal back then, and I think is still should be considered a big deal. First and foremost, his voyages were the first to describe all sorts of things, to identify certain things, and I'm just going to race through some of these real quickly. His voyages were the first to make use of this amazing navigational tool called the chronometer, which was basically just a clock. It was a sea clock that enabled voyagers to tell the time anywhere they went in the world. They could tell what time it was in Greenwich, England, which was the decided upon reference point, and of course still is the meridian, the prime meridian. So I won't go into all the sort of complicated mathematics, but upshot is this little tool, which is about this big. I mean, it's nothing really to think about other than it's an amazingly well-built clock that could withstand all the thunks and knocks and different humidities of the sea. The sea clock could give Captain Cook an understanding of where he was in the world exactly. Longitude was the big issue here, and this enabled him to say where he was. Now, why does that matter? Like previous discoverers, previous explorers, like Tasman, Abel Tasman, for example, the Dutch explorer in the 1600s, got to New Zealand, but he didn't know where it was. He couldn't, when he got back to the Netherlands, tell people, oh, well, it's somewhere down there. You sail about 8 months south and 3 weeks east, and you might find it. Captain Cook now is the beneficiary of this amazing tool, and he can say exactly where it is. So you can see that chronometer and many others at Greenwich, the museum, the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, which is extraordinary. Any of you been there? A good number. Amazing, amazing place. One of the great spots in the world. So Captain Cook was believed to be the first sailor to travel south of the Antarctic Circle. On his first and second voyages, he went way down south. He encountered lots of icebergs, but he was pursuing this mythic thing called Terra Australis incognita. There was this wide belief among scientists that there just had to be this massive continent at the bottom of the planet full of people. Millions of people were supposed to be down there. And the reason there had to be a continent is because the preponderance of land masses in the northern hemisphere would mean that without it, the planet would be top heavy. It would spin off into outer space. I mean, lots of very leading scientists wrote about this. And Cook was sent down to locate this huge planet that was fixed on maps, this huge continent that was fixed on maps, and he proved that it wasn't there. Yes, we know Antarctica is there, we know Australia is down there, but this was supposed to be this massive thing. So he comes back to England, and he's called a hero of negative discovery. That is not finding the thing that was widely presumed to be there. Okay, so it's a nautical tale. We have to talk a little bit about scurvy, one of the worst maladies that beset sailors, long-distance voyagers. Spongy gums, horrible teeth. Your body basically slowly but surely disintegrates because of a lack of vitamin C. Captain Cook's voyages, all three of them, not a single man died of scurvy. And so he was widely thought to have conquered scurvy because of a regimen that he employed. He didn't understand anything about vitamin C, of course, but he understood that this horrible disease was somehow connected to the lack of fresh food. And he forced his men, often against their will, sometimes at gunpoint, to eat fresh meat, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, instead of the hardtack biscuits and the salt pork that was the typical food of these voyages. So the That's another thing he was famous for, is for conquering scurvy. He didn't exactly conquer it. He didn't really know what the trick was, but something in his regimen had led to 3 voyages without a single man dying of this dread disease. His voyages were also the first to describe the sport of surfing. This great photograph that Captain Cook snapped, not really. So on the 3rd voyage, in particular, his men, his officers are describing this amazing thing. You have to understand, English sailors back then, including Captain Cook, did not know how to swim. They were not required to know how to swim. How is that even possible? But let alone surf in huge waves. And so his officers are describing these massive waves, and these men get up on these boards, and women too, and they're just gorgeous athletes, and they somehow glide across the seas to the shore. So you get our first descriptions of surfing. You get the first description of the word and sort of analysis of the word taboo and the concepts beyond it, like places you can go, places you can't go. This is a temple in Tahiti that we went to. Things you can and cannot do, very complicated sort of system of laws and kind of religious concepts that very quickly enter the journals and then end up back in England and becomes part of the lexicon of English society. That's a taboo. You can't cross that line. So we get that. What else do we get? Lomi Lomi, which is Tahitian massage. We get our first descriptions of that. And Captain Cook, who was let's face it, he was British, right? He didn't like to be touched. Was also suffering from a life at sea. He was suffering from just every kind of, he was tight. He's tight. He needed to loosen up a little bit. And but he was also suffering from something called sciatica, a very intense kind of thing. I'm sure many of you have experienced it. And he underwent a treatment series. This whole army of masseuses descended upon him in his great cabin on the Resolution, and he, after 3 treatments, he was cured of his sciatica. And this very skeptical Yorkshireman is telling you, this is good stuff. You need to know about this massage thing. It's really good. So another first. We get our first description of a human sacrifice, which happened on Tahiti, in which Cook and his officers and his artists witnessed. And last but not least, tattooing. So everywhere they went in Polynesia, they encountered tattooing. They were artists at it. It was something that was everywhere. And all the officers remark on the incredibly ornate and intricate designs of these tattoos. And of course, his men start to say, hey, we got to get a tattoo. And everyone starts to get tattoos, which then becomes almost de rigueur. All nautical people have to have a tattoo now, right? Still to this day, that seems to be true. So that comes from Cook's early voyages. So I do these books, mainly this one is 250 years old. A lot of sitting in archives and lonely work, just staring at monographs and things like that. But there is one sociable part of doing these books, which is to get to know the scholars who have devoted their lives to the age of exploration, to the age of sail, and to, I'm talking about anthropologists and maritime historians, and all sorts of nerds that are out there, wonderful nerds that helped me write this book. And just a shout out quickly to them. First thing I had to do, though, of course, is get a membership into this thing called the Captain Cook Society. And I'm a card-carrying member, very proudly, they call themselves Cookies, as I mentioned earlier, and they are very intense. Some of them are buffs, and some of them are, very intense academics at top-rated institutions all over the world, in England, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and all points in between. So you get to know these guys. These are 2 past presidents of the society. They have excellent facial hair. They know every single thing about Captain Cook. I mean, the minutia, the thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of stuff that has been produced about Captain Cook and his voyages and his art and his art maps and the relics. It's an amazing you could spend a lifetime and several lifetimes trying to master all this stuff. And I couldn't have done it without some of these guys. Mostly guys. There's also women, but they're mostly guys who seem to really be into this age of exploration, from Hawaii to Oregon, Canada, England, Australia, so forth. But shout out to them. You also get to meet some of the collectors. There's a lot of stuff that came from these voyages that ended up in museums, many of which are, these items are being repatriated back to Polynesia, as they should be. This is a guy in Honolulu who has a bunch of stuff, including this barbed spear that was taken from came from Cook's third voyage. You have to question the provenance of all these items. It's very questionable, but I think this is a reputable guy. And it's so cool to kind of hold these things that Cook himself probably held in his great cabin, and think about kind of the physical, the tactile part of history. Very cool. The other kind of group of people you meet are the collectors of manuscripts and rare books. The Cook literature is voluminous. It's all over the map. These people are everywhere. These volumes fetch huge sums at auction, like Sotheby's. This is a guy in Maui whose name is Lou Weinstein, and he has maybe some of the best collections of Cook ancient works. This is from the third voyage. This is so after Cook got home from these voyages, of course, spoiler alert, he doesn't make it home from the third. I don't want to tell you this, but Cook dies. Okay, let's just get out of the way. These enormous folio-sized, beautiful books were printed on thick stock and leather-bound. It's make you realize the state of publishing has really diminished since those early days. And to hold them in your hand, the dust comes, the particles of dust come up from while you're holding the thing. It's just amazing. This was published in I think 1784. So anyway, that's an aspect of the research that is a whole lot of fun, getting to know these folks. Just a little bit about Cook's background. I wanted to go to Yorkshire and sort of understand where he came from, what his story was. He was raised in this little town of Ayton, which is in the moors, the moor country of Yorkshire. His father was a poor farmer. This is one of the things I love about Captain Cook, is that he really came from nothing, very modest circumstances. He was destined himself to be a farmer, just like his father. But one day when he was 7 years old, as legend has it, he went to this place, a place called Roseberry Topping in the countryside, where my wife and I climbed up to this top of this very, very high hill, or very, very low mountain. I don't know what you call it. Because, as legend has it, when he was 7 years old, Captain Cook climbed to the top of this, James Cook, little James, and for the very first time he saw the ocean 12 miles away. And he said, what is that? I want to be there. That looks interesting. This countryside and this farming lifestyle is for the birds. So he very quickly moved to this town as a young, I think he was 12. He apprenticed with a Quaker shipping concern that built ships that were made for the coal trade. They basically brought coal from Newcastle down to London. And he learned this trade. He became, a big part of the merchant marine, and he learned to sail these ships called Whitby cats. That town was called Whitby, and these are Whitby cats, built in Whitby. They are not sleek, they are not fast, they are not beautiful, but they are solid and stout and nearly bomb-proof. They can carry a huge amount of stuff inside, coal, timber, whatever, and they have a very shallow draft, so they can come really close to shore without running aground. So these are the ships that he learned to sail in the merchant marine, and they are also the ships that he ended up sailing on all of his 3 voyages around the world. The Whitby Cats, amazing, amazing ships. While he was in the merchant marine, he apparently sailed all over the North Sea, all over the Baltic. He made it as far as St. Petersburg. He's learning how to captain a ship. He's also beginning to learn mathematics, trigonometry, and astronomy. And he proves to be a genius at these disciplines, self-taught, and that is how he ultimately rises through the ranks of the Royal Navy to become a captain, and really was well on his way to being an admiral by the time he ventures off on his third voyage. Okay, real quickly, so the voyage in question, the voyage of that's the subject of the book, the third, I mean, and it's very confusing. All three of these voyages are monumental, huge things involving hundreds of men and just the full might of the British Empire. But I decided to write about the third one because it's the most dramatic one. It's the longest one, both in terms of duration and nautical miles. It's the most dramatic one because of some very vivid and violent things that happen in Hawaii at the end of the story. But this voyage was designed to find something that the British had been looking for a long time, which was the Northwest Passage, a shortcut over Canada or through Canada from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean so that the British Empire could trade with, the East Indies, with India, with China, thus avoiding the Spanish, who kind of controlled the southern waters, and the Portuguese as well. So this had become one of the grim motifs of the British Empire. They go and they burrow into the eastern precincts of Canada, and they get stuck in the ice. And next thing you know, they're starving and they're eating shoe leather and scurvy. All the great classic themes. But it became this obsession, like, well, we've spent this much blood and treasure. Let's keep looking for it. We got to find that damn thing. And so the idea of this expedition was, let's look for it in the opposite direction. Let's stop looking for it from the Atlantic side. Let's go all the way around the world to the Pacific, go up to that place that the Russians had been exploring a little bit called Alaska, and maybe we'll find it from that side. So basically, come over this way and go that way. Why they thought that would be any better, why they thought that they wouldn't get stuck in the ice just like they had on the other side, I don't know. But this was the idea, this was the objective of Cook's third voyage, was to go to Alaska, explore it, see what it's really all about, and also look for the Northwest Passage. So Captain Cook wasn't just this, random dude, like, oh, I'm an explorer. I want to do this stuff because it's cool. I'm Dora the Explorer. No, he had the full might and money and brain power of the British Empire behind him. And I just quickly go through some of the prime movers, the important people who were behind this voyage. So first and foremost, behind Captain Cook's third, he's this guy, George, King George III, our king, briefly. Those things will change during the course of this story. So King George III was a big supporter of Cook, loved his voyages, loved the science that was coming from them. He also loved the fact that it extended the reach of the empire, of course, against the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese and all the other European powers. He was also famously, mad King George, right? He goes mad, but not yet. He's only just beginning to go a little mad because of things that are happening in Boston at this very moment, 1776. But anyway, his other thing was he was a farmer. He was not actually a farmer, but he got interested in animal husbandry and thought that the Tahitians really needed to have a lot of animals, like farm animals that you'd find on an English farm. So Captain Cook, when he leaves on this voyage, has to bring, cows and bulls and goats and sheep and peacocks and hens and all kinds of plants and bulbs and seeds from English gardens and English farms, which makes Captain Cook's voyage very difficult. All these animals, he's trying to keep them alive while also exploring. Anyway, King George. Another prime mover of the voyage is the Royal Society of London, which was the preeminent intellectual fraternity going, back to the time of Sir Isaac Newton. They were big believers in these voyages. They were big proponents. They put up money. They put up scientific kind of wherewithal and theories, including and especially this guy, who future president of the Royal Society, Joseph Banks, one of the great botanists of all time, very famous guy. If any of you been to Kew Gardens, that was all kind of started by him and his interest in plants from all over the world, exotic plants. Not the guy, not to be confused with the guy with the cheap suits that you get in malls, Joseph Banks. Different guy, yeah. And then this guy, also very important, maybe the most powerful man in England at that time, aside from King George himself. And this is John Montague, the Earl of Sandwich, also known as the First Lord of the Admiralty. Big believer in Cook, love these voyages, love the science behind them, big proponent of all this stuff, and really the architect of this voyage. He is also, perhaps even more famously, known as the inventor of a certain kind of food. Very busy guy. He was a workaholic. He was on the move, and he said, I can't eat. I can't sit down and eat. I got stuff to do. And so he came up with the idea of sticking a slice of roast beef between two slices of bread and creating, the sandwich. This checks out. This story is actually apparently true. So I'm gonna stand by this one. Okay. So the voyage itself, they leave in July of 1776, July 12th of 1776, bound for all these amazing places. This is a map in the book, so you'll get that when you buy the book. I know you'll be buying the book. So they leave Plymouth in July 12th in perfect ignorance of this thing that's just happened a few days earlier in Philadelphia. And it's a really interesting theme of the book is that they leave and they're gone for 4 years and they know nothing about these events that are happening, with the Revolutionary War. But there are Americans on board. There are a good number of officers who are American-born, including the man who ends up bringing the ships home to London. John Gore was from Virginia. So it's kind of a cool theme. As once you leave London, once you leave England, the amount of information is very paltry and very slow moving. So I'd like to mention, this is not a biography of Captain Cook. It is really an ensemble story about a lot of officers and a lot of other men, and also a lot of the indigenous people that they encounter along the way. But here are 3 officers who are on board the ships, that just to single out. On the left, you have this guy who is the master of the Resolution and ends up being one of the most famous captains of all time, but kind of in a notorious way. This guy on the left is William Bligh of the HMS Bounty fame a little bit later, very famous mutiny. Guy on the right, George Vancouver, the upper right. He is goes on to be one of the most famous explorers of Alaska and British Columbia and that whole part of the world. Oh, the third guy, can I go back, is John Ledyard on the bottom right. He was an American, born in Connecticut, went to Dartmouth, somehow got sort of pressed into service and ended up as a Marine on this voyage. And he writes a very interesting account of Cook's third voyage, which becomes the very first book ever copyrighted in the United States. John Ledyard is his name. And then he goes on to become an explorer all over Eurasia and Africa. Just some of the interesting cats in this story. So Captain Cook's first point of where he has to stop and check something out is a place called the Kerguelen Islands. So he leaves England, he makes a brief stop in South Africa, and then he's supposed to check out this place called the Kerguelen Islands because there was a rumor that the French had been to this remote island somewhere way down there near Antarctica, and he had to go check it out because anything the French did, the English had to do too, of course. That means way down there in the southern Indian Ocean. through fog and heavy seas and just unbelievably trying circumstances where a lot of these animals on board the ship are dying. He dutifully locates this island chain on Christmas Day, and he decides it's for the birds. He hates it. In fact, literally for the birds. It's only inhabited by birds, penguins and a lot of other birds. There are no French people there. This is the place the French had briefly stopped. It is. He decided that the French can have it, and it is to this day a French possession in the way, way far South Pacific. Next stop was Tasmania, a place that had really never been explored. No one fully realized yet that it was a separate island from Australia. He anchored at this place called Bruny Island on the south coast of Tasmania. Beautiful place. And his men had this amazing first contact experience. Everything went well. Everything went according to plan. There was good trade. Everyone was peaceful. There was no violence. There was no sexual encounters, thus spreading, venereal disease or anything like that. Everything went well. His artist painted these beautiful paintings, which became engravings of the Palawa people, the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. And this is first contact at its best, when everything goes well. Sometimes it doesn't go well. This time it did. They're only there about a week. Cook got everything he kind of wanted out of the experience. He sort of jots down all of his impressions of the place, and he leaves. But then, almost exactly 1 century after his touching at this island, the Palawa people are virtually extinct. Devastated by disease, by all kinds of weird policies, and actually by the English. There was a policy just to hunt them for sport. In 1870, I can't remember the exact date, this photograph was taken of the last known full-blooded Palawa person, an elderly woman named Truganini. So I think this kind of gets at the question of why people resent Cook so much. It's not what he did, it's what he set in motion that led to this sort of fatal impact, as they call it. And it's a very complicated question, but also one that is being debated all over Australia and all over the world, all over the Pacific, for sure. Moving on to New Zealand, Captain Cook has a little piece of unfinished business in New Zealand to take care of, having to do with something that happened on his second voyage, where 10 of his men were attacked and were killed by the Maori warriors, and then they were promptly eaten. Yes, some cannibalism in the book. Always a good seller. That always helps sell the book. And he has to sort of put on this other hat of being basically a homicide detective to figure out what happened, why did it happen, and he decides ultimately that it was his own men's fault, and he completely forgives the Maori warriors for the thing. He didn't really care about the cannibalism part. He just wanted to find out who started the whole fracas that led to their killing. But I did go to New Zealand with my wife. I had some very difficult research postings, both on the North and the South Island. I mean, one of the most beautiful places on Earth, and a place that Cook had, circumnavigated and mapped, a place where he felt very much at home. This was the place where all that cannibalism stuff happened, a place called Ship Cove in the Queen Charlotte Sounds on the South Island. After that, he goes. I have to skip many of the stops. He goes through the Cook Islands. He goes through Tonga, that whole island group, and then finally he makes his way to Tahiti and the Society Islands, a place that was just, loomed large in the imaginations of all sailors, because it was a place that was known to be beautiful, where there was great food, where the women were beautiful and willing, and only good things happened in Tahiti, and Cook's painters painted it beautifully. They made it seem like, and not just Cook. I mean, the French went there, the Spanish went there. They all had good experiences in Tahiti and the Society Islands. Again, please don't resent the fact that I had to do this research. This is also Tahiti, an atoll just off of Tahiti. So yeah, so Captain Cook, though, when he went there, he wasn't just going for R&R and having some relaxing times, but he had a mission, and that mission had to do with this guy here, a guy named Mai, who is a very important character in the book. He's a Polynesian man who came to England on Cook's second voyage. He was picked up on one of the islands, brought to England, and had this amazing experience in London and all over England. They really rolled out the red carpet for him. First thing they did is they, introduced him to King George, and then they got him vaccinated for smallpox, which was a new thing. And then they taught him English, and he learned to play backgammon and chess, and became this sort of fixture of parlors and salons. And he learned to hunt. He got quite adept with a weapon, and he introduced England to this thing called barbecue. He was an amazing cook, as it turned out. On and on it goes. He met Boswell and Johnson and all the intellectuals. He was paraded around like the Royal Society as the kind of the paragon of the noble savage, and had this extraordinary experience. So I read a lot about Mai in the book. But after 2 years, he's homesick. He wants to go back to Tahiti, and he's not sure if they're going to, am I just stuck on this island forever? But King George says, no, we're going to take you home. And the guy who's going to take you home is the best chauffeur you could ever imagine, Captain James Cook. So they bring him. That is the kind of errand number one of the expedition, is to get Mai home. With all his weird belongings, by this point he's accumulated all kinds of gifts, like a full suit of armor, muskets, ammunition, a Bible, an electrifying machine that you grind. It was something to do with Benjamin Franklin's experiments. A jack-in-the-box, all kinds of weird toys. And the idea was to bring them back to Tahiti and show them how amazing England is. Just before he left on this voyage, he was painted by the greatest portrait painter in all of England. These are studies that Sir Joshua Reynolds did in getting ready for this painting, which is considered his masterpiece. It's called Portrait of Omai. And it was his favorite painting. It's also, it's 8 feet tall. It's a massive painting. It's in England right now, but it was just recently sold to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and it was sold for $62 million. So Mai is still famous to this day. So big character in the book. Captain Cook does leave him in Tahiti with all his stuff. Things do not go so well for him. I won't really tell you what happens to him, but it's a kind of a bittersweet story about cross-pollination, cross-cultural exchange. Let's put it that way. So he leaves Tahiti and he's headed for Oregon, what we would now call Oregon. And he stumbles upon this amazing island, which wasn't supposed to be there. It's not on any of the maps. The Hawaiian island chain. He makes landfall at Kauai, this extraordinarily beautiful place. And he's like, wow, this is big. This is a major thing. This wasn't supposed to happen. And this was one of the things about Cook's voyages. Is that his boats seemed to be sort of drawn to land like a magnetic attraction. It's like he always found these places that other explorers seem to miss. He knows this is a major discovery. He's really captivated by the Polynesian people that he meets. He's able to communicate with them because they speak essentially the same language as the Tahitians and the Maori. It's, with some variations. And he's beginning to realize that these are all the same people, all these people all over the Pacific. He begins to understand that there has been this huge diaspora. There's been this huge expanse of ocean populated by seafaring people who understood the stars, and they understood the currents, and they understood the prevailing winds, and they were amazing sailors. Obviously, this was not an accident. This was there was something profound going on, and he is really the first European explorer to begin to see the extent of it and write about it in his journals. Because he had been to Easter Island, he had been to New Zealand, he'd been to Tonga, he'd been to Tahiti, and now Hawaii, the very tip of what they call the Polynesian Triangle. So, as only an explorer who's been over these same oceans can sort of begin to appreciate, he sees what the Polynesians had done, and that he understood these were not just accidental driftings; these were planned migrations. They brought food with them, they brought animals with them, and they went back and forth over many voyages to get to these places and go back to their home islands. So he continues onward towards the Pacific Northwest coast, makes landfall at this place called Cape Foulweather in Oregon. Cook's names, okay, he named a lot of things, all right? Sometimes his names were not that interesting. Literal, very literal-minded. So this is Cape Foulweather because the weather's always bad there. One of the cool things about Cook, though, is that he never, in all of his travels, he never named a single thing after himself or his family, which was considered the prerogative of explorers back then. You could do that, but it says something about his modesty and his kind of Quaker upbringing that he didn't want to do that. Now, you will see his name all over the place. Cook Inlet, Mount Cook in New Zealand, Cook Strait, I don't know, more and more. There's just Cooks everywhere. But even a crater on the moon named after Cook. But those are things named by other people, not Cook himself. So anyway, this is Cape Foulweather in Oregon. He went by another place that flattered him. He thought it would be a wonderful port. Turned out, obviously, not a good port. So he called it Cape Flattery. On working his way northward, I mean, there's just so much to unpack in this voyage. I don't even know how I'm going to get through all this and get to questions. But they go up through Vancouver Island. This is a place called Nootka Sound that I went with some of my family. Got to meet the village elder, a guy named Ray here, who was the very last living Yuquat elder in the town of Yuquat, which is in Nootka Sound. Working our way up Alaska, he passes by Mount St. Elias, which is the second largest mountain in North America, on up to Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet. Needless to say, we had a ball doing all of this travel, but Cook Inlet, very famous place. It's, leads to Anchorage, the site of Anchorage, but it has the second largest tidal differential in North America after the Bay of Fundy, and it becomes a mud bog at low tide, and his ships nearly got stuck there. So by this point, every time there's something like an inlet or a bay or anything, he's checking it out. He's trying to find out, could this be the Northwest Passage? So every time he does it, it's a cul-de-sac. He's frustrated. This is terrible. He's not supposed to waste any time on these things, but he also has the summer season to work with. He can't do this in the winter. So he's got a deadline hanging over him. As he works his way north, he goes through the Aleutian Islands into the Bering Sea, traces the entire west coast of Alaska, goes through the Bering Strait, up and over Alaska to Barrow. These are some pictures from a previous book that I did in the Kingdom of Ice, where I went through some of the same territory. He eventually encounters an impenetrable wall of ice near kind of close to Barrow, Alaska, what we call that today. And he realizes, I got to get out of here. There is no Northwest Passage, at least not this season. And he realizes he's about to get trapped in the ice. Along the way, his men encounter polar bear. They hunt for walrus. They have amazing experiences. And, I think Captain Cook is most widely known for his Polynesian southern islands, South Seas experiences, people forget how much time he spent in the Arctic and mapping the entire coast of Alaska. And this is Cook at his best when he is really exploring places that have never, been seen by map makers before. So I'm going to show you a little bit of kind of a before and after map thing that gets to the heart of Cook's voyage in Alaska. So this is the map he had to work with, which it emerged from Bering's expeditions from several decades earlier. They are really wrong. This map is really wrong, like cartoonishly wrong. And Cook decides that it is deliberately wrong, that the Russians were really trying to kind of obscure some key facts. But it shows Alaska there in the upper right corner, the little island, nice little island called Alaska, and all these other little teeny islands. And it also shows a waterway to the right of Alaska where they thought that could be the Northwest Passage. The Admiralty said, yeah, you go there, find out. That maybe will get you to the Atlantic Ocean. So that's the map he had to work with. Cook became so frustrated with it, he said, a bad map is worse than no map at all. Because this is a map maker at heart. And so this is the map that his voyage produced, that came out of his voyage. And, he's just pissed off the whole time. He just can't believe how amateurish those old maps were. This is a German publication that came out of his own maps. But he and his officers charted this. There's mistakes. There's some things that are wrong about it, but it is considering that it was almost done entirely in fog and high seas, almost entirely from ships, not from shore. It's quite accurate, and it is. It just shows one of his greatest skills, if not his greatest skill, at work. So most commanders at this point would have said, all right, there's no Northwest Passage. This is not going to happen. It's not safe. It's not practical. Let's go home. They've been gone for 3.5 years. It's time. It's going to take 2 more years to get home. But he doesn't do that. He says, let's go back to that amazing island, Hawaii, that archipelago, and explore that for the winter, because we got to warm up. Can't spend the winter up here, and then we'll come back to Alaska next summer and see if we can find the passage some other way. So that's what he does. He goes back to Hawaii, which isn't exactly close. What is it, 4,000 miles, something like that, maybe 5. But following, just like the humpback whales that spend the summers up in Alaska and then they go back to Hawaii, he followed the humpback whales back to Hawaii. And as we all know, and I do think if Captain Cook is famous for anything, it is for dying in a very violent and very graphic way on the shores of Hawaii. So spoiler alert, he dies, okay? At this amazing place called Kealakekua Bay, which is on the Kona coast of the big island of Hawaii. After circumnavigating the island, he anchors here at the height of a thing called the Makahiki, which is a festival devoted to the god Lono. And it becomes apparent very quickly that the people there, at least many of them, seem to think he is the god Lono. And it's very complicated, all the reasons why they think this, but they bring him ashore. There's thousands out in the water in all these canoes. There's thousands on the shore who lead him to the temple where they bow down to him and call him Lono. And let's just say they may think he's a god, if not the god, Lono. And he has an amazing experience, he and his men, for several weeks on the big island of Hawaii. Couldn't have been better. But then, through a very complicated set of circumstances that I won't go into, they decide he is not the god Lono. And we end up with this scene here, which, the death of Captain Cook is part of the iconography of exploration. It's been painted many, many times. It's in etchings and engravings. It's including, this is a Hawaiian, native Hawaiian painter named Herb Kane. how did this most disciplined of explorers, how did this man who prided himself, I think justifiably, on his general understanding of Polynesian culture and his appreciation of Polynesian culture, end up dead on the lava flats of Hawaii? It's a good question. It is the kind of the question that I deal with in the last 100 pages or so of the book, and I won't talk about it any more than to say that. But that is the story of the Wide, Wide Sea. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Not a single rotten tomato. So thank you for that as well. We have a little bit of time for some questions. Let's see, what time is it? Yeah, we will be fast, but I want to get a couple of questions in for sure.
Oops, I'm sorry, did I step on you? So he starts out in a way the colonial exercised so well, and how does it go so wrong? I mean, why don't, because his people come back and they see what worked and what didn't, and it's just nobody recognizes that what the next thing is different. Maybe I'm not asking the question well.
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying is that, Cook was an explorer and a map maker, and he loved doing this kind of stuff. A little bit of a proto-anthropologist. He was curious about these cultures. I don't think he was naive. I think he understood that he was working in the service of the empire and this larger chess game to sort of carve up the planet and exploit resources and compete against all these other European powers. But, I don't think he, and he does write quite eloquently in his journals about some of his misgivings about this whole process. He does. But what comes almost immediately after Cook is the occupiers, the navies, the armies, the alcohol, all the germs, the diseases, the missionaries. If Cook could see all this stuff, I think he would feel it was a tragic thing that he had been a part of. I really do think that because what animated him the most, what got him excited, was making those maps, going someplace that had never been mapped before. The puzzle of it. He was you'd probably say he was a little bit on the spectrum. He was like this genius detail guy who happened to also be a pretty good captain of a ship, which is like running a city on the high seas. But he, I don't think he enjoyed the imperial part of it. The sort of like reporting back to the admiralty about this, that, or the other. He did it, but that wasn't the part that got him excited. Does that sort of get at what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Any other question? An Alaskan here.
The index, the bibliography, and the notes are about 5 times larger for this book than any other book you've written.
Yeah.
What's it like now to put one of these together? Do computers help?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a long time. This book took me longer than any of my other books. There's so much literature on Captain Cook that I had to kind of digest. Thank God for all those scholars I talked about who kind of led me through it a little bit. It near about gave me an aneurysm trying to keep track of all this stuff. Not only because it's voluminous, but because it's, 2.5 centuries ago. People spoke differently. They wrote differently. It's hard to read the original stuff. There's a lot of ampersands and yees, like the way they talked and wrote back then. So I had to kind of get through that, and also the zeitgeist of London and that time period. I had to kind of, I think I understand it. I speak English, I read English, but I really don't know that world. So I had to kind of learn a lot. But it was like going in a time machine, going back in time and learning and kind of experiencing life back then. That was actually a fun part of doing the book. But it took a long time. So that's not my only... I had to be pretty well organized with my notes and stuff like that too. But Thanks for your question. This gentleman is from, these folks are from Alaska, actually, or used to be. And I stayed in their house a long, long time ago, and they were very kind to me. Good to see y'all. Next question.
So I'll ask one more.
Yeah.
Did he lose any ships in his? I mean, he went through terrible seas, the Pacific near the Arctic, which is supposed to be huge waves all the time. I mean, people lose ships. Lots of explorers lost lots of ships. Yes. Did he lose a lot? Did he lose any?
This is one of the other things about Captain Cook that's amazing is that he not only did he not lose anyone to scurvy, but he never lost a ship.
That's amazing.
And it's amazing. Now, he nearly lost a ship on the first voyage, the Endeavor, which was just a solo thing. There wasn't a consort ship with him. He ran aground on the Great Barrier Reef and very nearly sank. And if that had happened, we would never have heard from him again. But he, through some very quick thinking, they threw out a lot of ballast and they did a couple of very quick techniques and limped the ship into shore and repaired the ship. That was the closest he ever came to, that I know of, to ever losing a ship. So he had this amazing good luck. It's kind of amazing. You say, well, he died and had this terrible luck, but it's amazing that he got that far, having traveled around the world 3 times and never had anything untoward happen until then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This will be the last question.
Last question. I'm told because we have to do some commerce.
So Hampton, you've spent like
And these folks have to get home, but go
the
ahead.
last few years, a couple of centuries ago. So, who are the Captain Cooks today? Who's doing this now? In your, I mean, I know you don't know the answer to that, but in your imagination, who are the Captain Cooks? And are they any Captain Cooks?
Yeah. Last night I was at the Explorers Club in New York City and gave a talk. And there are a bunch of these kinds of people that will show up. You know, like there are a lot of course, space people. Of course, space is still kind of the next frontier, and I guess privatization of space, and also, of course, the deep ocean. People who are exploring the Mariana Trench and the deepest parts of the ocean. People are exploring the interstices of the brain, or the cells. I think the frontier is kind of in a lot of other places now. We've kind of explored the surface of the planet. We have to go a lot deeper to find this kind of mentality. But I mean, I think I just end by saying, I think that Captain Cook is, we are right to reassess him and his age of exploration to find out was it a good thing, was it a bad thing. But I think you could also say it was an inevitable thing, that it is so deeply embedded in the human DNA to explore, to ask questions. What's over the next hill? What's over the next wave? And he was an example of that genuine curiosity that is so part of us that it's like you can say, well, he shouldn't have gone, he shouldn't have wondered, he shouldn't have wandered, he should have just stayed at home. But that's sort of asking a lot, because that's asking humans not to be human. And of all people, the Polynesians themselves, the greatest voyagers perhaps in history of the world, understand that idea. They migrated all over the Pacific and populated these places, and did so by virtue of this same instinct of find something better, find something new. So I think it's what I like to end on is this notion that it is entirely possible. Imagine this: that the Polynesians came to England first, or they arrived in Plymouth. What would have happened to them? What would that encounter have been like? I like to imagine that hypothetical and just kind of leave our imaginations sitting on that one for a while. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Let's sign some books. It's been a pleasure.